Recognizing our quorum, I'm calling this meeting of the Cannabis Control Commission to order as of 12:03 p.m. on, Thursday, December 21st, 2017. Before we begin official business, I would like to request, is anybody recording this meeting, please raise their hand. Thank you. As this meeting is being recorded, I would like to put the public attendees on notice that we are recording this meeting. Can everybody hear me in the back? Thank you. Well, the good news is that we're not running a popularity contest because I would lose a popularity contest right now. We are going to put this meeting in recess for 90 minutes. We have some further preparatory work that we want to do to make sure that we have an informed and effective and thorough conversation of the draft regulations. So as of this moment, I'm putting the meeting into recess until 1:30 p.m. Thank you, and I apologize for any inconvenience that might cause people. Pardon?
Where's lunch?
There's a Subway across Cambridge Street. There's a great burrito place on the other side of Stanford Street. I'm really sorry. I really apologize for the inconvenience. PM. Everybody that is recording, are you all set? Okay. First of all, my apologies again for any inconvenience that we might have created by this recess, but I really do appreciate everybody's understanding. So thank you for that, and again, my apologies. Before we jump into it, I just want to talk about kind of where we are and what we're going to do today. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, so this might be redundant for some of you, but I also see some new faces, and then obviously this is being streamed, so there might be some people that are less familiar than others. So let me just do a brief where we are and where we're going, and then we'll talk about the process for today. Right. We don't need this anyway. So we spent 4 days in public meetings last week, as most of you are aware, either because you read about it or you actually sat through the sessions. We agreed on over 80 policies that were specifically about what categories of licenses we were going to authorize, what operating and security requirements we were going to place on licensees in each of those categories, the process by which we were going to decide which license applications to approve, and the appeals process in case we disapproved of an application, and then some generic issues that didn't fit neatly into any of those previous categories, like, for instance, what special regulations do we put in place for Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket? And there were over 80, I don't have an exact count, but there were over 80 decisions that we made last week that I called policy decisions. We have then spent the week since we last met, which was Thursday, doing two things. One is all of us have had meetings with various interest groups and parties that wanted to comment on what we decided last week, and I found the meetings, at least that I participated in, to be extraordinarily helpful. People saw some things that we might have missed or suggested changes, but I want to emphasize we are not going to reopen any of those debates today. That is not the purpose of today. We have plenty of time during the hearings and the public comment period, which I'll talk about in a second, where we can consider changes to the draft regulations that we're about to discuss. The other thing that we did between last Thursday and today, and I use the word we very loosely because I had nothing to do with this, is took all of the decisions we made last week, the 80 plus decisions we made last week, and embedded them into proposed regulations. And when I say we loosely, it does not include me. I know this is sounding a little bit like a broken record, but I just do want to just emphasize the work that Commissioner Doyle and Commissioner McBride did in terms of taking what we did last week and crafting it into 108 pages of draft regulations that I think is a superb product. I think that these could become final tomorrow. We have a process by which they're not going to become final until March 15th, but they're so well done that I'm just amazed at what we were able to accomplish in a very short period of time. And I want to recognize Commissioners McBride and Doyle and thank them not just for their incredible capabilities and work, but for operating with very little sleep for the last week and staying in good humor For the most part, there's been a couple of breakdowns, but for the most part, in very good humor. So, I don't want to leave anybody out. So Commissioner Title, Commissioner Flanagan, myself, Executive Director Collins have all been working pretty hard this week as well. But on a relative basis, we've been slacking while Commissioners McBride and Doyle have done just an extraordinary job. So I just wanted to acknowledge and recognize and thank the two of them for that. That said, any errors are mine, not theirs. So let's talk about where we are. So we did spend last week, as you know, discussing policies. We are going to talk about and vote on and approve the draft regulations that Commissioners McBride and Doyle and Commissioner Title contributed to writing over the last week. When we are done, and when we are done is just like last week, I don't know when that will be. We have today till 5 o'clock till we get thrown out of here. We have a meeting scheduled back at the Gaming Commission's offices tomorrow at 10:30, and we're going to go until we're done. And I can't, since I have not had conversations with the commissioners up to this point, I don't know how many issues we're going to have to resolve today. We might get done today, we might not get done until tomorrow, but again, I really can't forecast. But once we are done, the draft regulations will be posted on the Commission's website and filed with the Secretary of State's office on or before December 29th, 2017. We're hoping before, but that is the deadline. What we are going to go through today, which are the draft regulations that we're going to be discussing and voting, we'll post on the website, but they're not the final draft regulations, but they are the materials that we use today, so they will be posted on our website. But the actual final draft regulations, if that's not an oxymoron, will be posted on our website no later than December 29th, 2017. We will also shortly post the dates and locations of the public hearings and notice on our website, and additionally we will send notice of those dates to the Boston Herald. So that's what happens next, and I think I've gone over this a few times. We will have those public hearings in February. We will have additional public meetings of the Commission to discuss the feedback and the suggestions and ideas that we got from those public hearings, discuss and decide upon whether we need to make any changes or modifications to the draft regulations, and have final regulations promulgated with the Secretary of State by March 15th, 2018. So that's where we are. Let's talk about what we're going to do today and how we're going to go through it. So we have, as I said, 108 pages of pretty dense type. I'm not going to post it because I'm not going to project it, excuse me, because nobody can read it. I apologize for that. Again, those materials will be posted on our website today. We are going to go through section by section, and there's approximately 30 sections which we will go through, and we're going to operate by exception. So for section 500.001, I'm going to ask each of the commissioners, do you have any issues with the language? If not, we'll move on to section 500.002. If there are issues, we'll stop, talk about them, and we will vote on either to keep the language that was originally in these drafts or any changes that we agree on, and we'll do that for every section of the regulations if there are any issues. When we are done with that, we will have essentially a revised draft that will include whatever decisions we made about specific sections along the way, and then we will have a vote to approve the entirety of the draft regulations, and that will be the end of the meeting. As I said previously, I just don't know when that's going to be. The kinds of issues that will come up are not, again, to re-debate policy decisions that we made last week. What we are going to do is going to find where there are, if there are issues, there'll be issues like inconsistency between one section and another, inconsistency between what we agreed on last week and the actual language of the regulations, where something needs additional clarity. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to be discussing today, and if necessary, voting on to put into the final draft of these draft regulations. So that's the process. I think it's going to be a little drier than last week, is my guess. But what I can do, can you help me? Because it doesn't seem to be changing for me. Thank you very much. What I'll do is, if we can get this changed, I'll show you, I have the list of the sections, so you can at least track what section we're in as we go through this. But again, it would be a fool's errand to try to project the actual draft regulations themselves. So it's not necessary. I'll just, don't worry about it. I'll just read it out loud where we are. Okay, thank you. So unless there are any questions or comments from the commission?
We're not bringing up typos.
No, the resolution that we're going to vote on when we get done will be subject to correcting clerical errors, formatting errors, and other ministerial corrections, whatever that is. So, yeah, no, so we're not going to bring up typos right now.
Cool.
I think that would, if we're going to put the audience to sleep, that would be a guaranteed way to do it, don't you think? So, okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so let's get going. This is what I've been told. We are working on 935 of the Code of Massachusetts Regulations 500. Is that correct? So I'm going to admit as I walk us through, this is 935 CMR, because they're all 935 CMR, and the sections are going to go start with. Actually, I'll even admit the 500 because it's 935 CMR Code of Massachusetts Regulations 500. All of our regulations have that prefix, and then after the 500, it's .001, .002, and so forth. So all I'm going to refer to is the .001 rather than having to repeat the whole thing, unless that gets me into legal trouble.
Nope.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's start. The first section is .001, purpose. Are there any comments or questions in that section?
No.
Okay, so let the record show we're moving on. .002, definitions, which is a much longer section. Do we have any questions or comments on that section?
Yep, I have a hold.
You have a hold, where would it be,
On
Commissioner
social
Doyle?
consumption operation.
Pardon? Social consumption?
Yep, that's page 9.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, despite checking and rechecking, I apparently did manage to miss one issue from last week's policy discussions, which Commissioner Title just helpfully brought to my attention. So the definition of social consumption as it is currently stated on that page says, social consumption operation means an entity licensed to purchase or otherwise acquire marijuana from licensed marijuana establishments and sell single servings of marijuana to consumers for consumption or use on the premises. And this will also get addressed later on, but one issue is that the issue of single serving in sort of a singular pack is not what would happen in a restaurant style setting for infused foods. So we're going to add a little detail to that issue later. And I just to reserve that issue, I want to add at the end of the sentence here, comma, except as otherwise authorized herein.
Okay, except as otherwise.
And apologies to Commissioner Title. Sleepy editing on my part.
I think, let me set a ground rule for the rest of this meeting, which is no apologies to anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, good.
I mean, we can apologize to the audience, but to each other,
Yes.
no apologies are necessary. Does anybody have any comment on the proposed wording change from Commissioner Doyle? Can I have a motion to approve? I think we do have to approve each of those, is that correct?
I thought we were going to do it so that we went all the way through, as long as no one had an objection.
As long as no one
to
had,
it.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so thank you. Any other holds on section .002, definitions?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Commissioner Title.
This is
Which one?
social justice leader.
Okay, so that's on page 9.
That's on page 9, right after the one we just did. I had submitted that as a definition, but then we don't have any other kind of leader defined, so I suggest we just strike
Yep.
it.
You are correct.
Strike, okay.
Yep, because it's otherwise spelled out in another part of the regulation.
Okay. Any objections or any comments on that? Great, thank you. Any other comments on .002 definitions? Great, okay, then let's move on. .005, I'm just curious why we skipped numbers, but you can tell me at some other time, Commissioner Doyle.
I can tell you right now if anyone's interested. It's simply to leave room in the event that there are other things in the future that you may want to insert.
Good answer. Okay, .005, fees. Any holds on this section? Commissioner Title?
Under micro business,
Yeah.
we came up with the license fee by taking half of cultivation.
Yes,
But I realized they would
should be by
also
tier?
be manufacturing as well.
okay.
And so I would suggest that we just change that to say
50%
50%
of
of the
applicable.
sum of license fees. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah, that's good catch. Any,
So under annual license fee,
yeah,
we're changing it to 50%.
of applicable?
Applicable license fees.
Okay. Any objections to that?
No.
Any other comments on .005 fees?
Yes, another one.
Okay, go ahead.
Under fines,
Oh, fines, okay, so that
the
is,
same section, right?
It's.
yes, it is, it's page 12, it's subsection D.
Okay. I just didn't understand this sentence. The commission.
Which,
The first sentence under fines.
Okay.
The commission may issue an order to show cause as to why a fine or other financial penalty against a licensee should not be imposed for any act or omissions which are in violation of any provision of the act or any regulation. I didn't get it.
Too many negatives?
I think that's actually, I did not write this, I think that was our contract attorney.
Okay.
But I also think that's actually language that is used throughout the Code of Massachusetts regulations in these sections.
What's your
remember-
concern, Commissioner Tanner?
I don't understand it.
It's essentially it's a citation. That what they're saying is you're issuing a notice that the commission's agent believes the establishment to be in violation, and this is an opportunity to respond to that. And
So
you
it's
know,
for the licensee to show cause, so it's basically them defending themselves?
yeah, it's old language, you know.
Could I suggest that we just add may issue an order for the licensee to show cause? Just so there's like a subject there, so it's understandable.
Yeah, I don't think that's a problem.
I'm okay with that. Anybody object to that?
What is she saying?
So the, in D1, under fines, the commission may issue an order to a licensee to show cause. Is that, so just add in the
Issue an
word
order to the licensee?
to the licensee after the word order in the first sentence.
Yeah, I think it's very standard language that's used again and again.
But
and
it doesn't
again.
harm
Yeah.
us to make it more
No,
explicit,
yep.
does it?
So may issue an order to
The licensee?
a licensee.
A licensee.
Yep.
Everybody okay with that? Any other holds on section .005? Okay, let's move on. .030, registration of marijuana establishment agents. Any holds on this section? Commissioner Doyle? Okay, then let's move on. .031, denial of a marijuana establishment agent registration card. Any issues on that section? Any holds? Okay, let's move on then. .032, revocation of a marijuana establishment agent revocation card, or registration card, excuse me. Any holds in this section? Okay, let's move on. .033, void marijuana establishment agent registration cards. Any holds in this section? Okay, let's move on. .040, leadership ratings program. Any holds in this section? Okay, let's move on. .050, marijuana establishments. Any holds in this section? Commissioner Title, could you just refer to the page, please?
A12 at the top of page 18.
18, thank you.
So it says, no licensee shall be granted more than 3 licenses in a particular class, except as otherwise specified. An independent testing laboratory or standards laboratory may not have a license in any other class. No individual or entity shall have control over more than 3 licenses in a particular class of license. And I flagged that last sentence because I saw controlling interest defined in the definitions, but I wasn't sure if control was defined, so I just wanted more clarity on that.
So if we change it to controlling interest, that would address your concern. I don't know if that would be
Let me just
acceptable
check.
to the others, but that would address your concern.
Yes.
controlling person.
Right. So. So if we used controlling person, yeah, that would be
To replace
fine.
the word control in the third line,
No individual or entity shall
Be a controlling
Be-
be
person.
a controlling person.
Yeah.
Is that acceptable to others? This is the time to have a debate if we want to, if we need to.
No individual.
And no individual entity will be a controlling person.
Citizens United radar is way up.
What's that, Commissioner?
The
Brett?
Citizens United radar is way up with having an entity be a controlling person. But
Oh, whether a corporation can be a person? Well, of course it can be. I mean,
Yeah,
the Supreme Court said
it
so.
is.
it is, yes, Chairman.
We are an apolitical organization.
So the final was shall be a controlling person rather than have control?
Yeah, and I would actually be fine substantively with either controlling person or controlling interest, as long as there's clarity there.
Okay, no, well, where it's a defined term and you want to refer back to that, that makes sense.
So, would you please read one more time, Commissioner Doyle, what you're proposing?
Stuffy nose. No individual or entity shall be a controlling person over more than 3 licenses in a particular class of license.
Any objections to that?
Not at this point.
Okay.
When the Supreme Court decides to write
Okay.
itself.
Any other holds in section 050? Marijuana establishments? No? Okay, let's move on. Section, dot 100, applications for marijuana establishment licenses. Any holds in that section? Commissioner Tuttle?
In
What, please, page, please?
page 22 at the bottom, 500.101A1A,
Yes?
documentation that the marijuana establishment is an entity registered to do business in Massachusetts, and a list of all executives, managers, persons, or entities having direct or indirect authority over the management policies, security operations, or cultivation operations of the marijuana establishment, close associates and members of the applicant, if any, and a list of all persons or entities contributing 10% more of the initial capital to operate the marijuana establishment, including capital that is in the form of land or buildings. I felt that that excludes vendors that are being paid a significant amount. And so I wanted to suggest including documentation of vendors over a percentage or amount. I'm open to what amount.
This was probably lack of, do you mind giving me an example? Just because I'm just trying to.
Yeah, so I own a staffing company. So I used to provide businesses with staffing services, and then they would pay me. I feel if that was a certain amount, that should be disclosed in the application.
Can I ask what the purpose for disclosing it is?
Well, when I was reading it, it just seems vague to say having direct or indirect authority, close associates or members of the applicant. I felt that along those same lines, a vendor who's receiving a significant amount would come under that.
Okay, close associates is defined in the statute, so let me just see if that's helpful.
Close associate means the person who holds a relevant
Got it.
financial interest in or is entitled to exercise power in the business of an applicant or licensee, and by virtue of that interest and power is able to exercise a significant influence over the management or operation. So I guess relevant financial interest in might be covered.
Yeah, I mean, if you're concerned about sort of contractors, et cetera, who are influencing being disclosed, I think close associates does probably cover that.
Okay.
I'd just be
withdraw that.
concerned about setting a dollar amount. 'Cause
Yeah.
I don't know that we have enough information to know what that would be.
Okay, I'm okay
You
with
okay with that?
withdrawing that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on dot 100, applications for marijuana establishment licenses? Any holds in that section? Commissioner Powell?
1 second.
Sure.
Okay, my next one's on page 34.
Still in that same section, page 34? Yeah, this is a long section. Page 34, what section?
This is a minor one. So H, what's XI? 11?
Yes.
H11, just to provide consistency with an earlier definition of diversity plans.
Yes.
I wanted to add back in people of all gender identities.
Where would that be in the sentence?
So that would be-
It's just consistent with the one that's up above.
Okay,
When we made
that's
the
fine.
amendment up above, it didn't carry down.
I can read the whole thing. Diversity plan to promote equity among minorities, women, veterans, people with disabilities, and people of all gender identities in the operation of the marijuana establishment.
Okay, I'm fine. Any problems with that? Okay, this internal consistency, so that's great. Anything else in section .100? Okay. Anybody else? We're set. Thank you. Next section is .101, licensure and renewal. Any holds in this section?
No.
Okay. And thank you. Let's move on. Section .102, notification of change. Any holds in this section? Okay. Thank you. .103, marijuana establishments, grounds for denial of initial application for license. Any holds in this section? Okay. Thank you. .1.
Sorry.
You want some water? Or
No, I want
you have
meds.
spring enough? .105, general operational requirements for marijuana establishments. Any holds in this section?
Yes.
Yes, Commissioner Tuttle, what page, please?
Page 43, D1C, permitted practices.
D1C. Yes, go ahead.
A marijuana establishment may display in secure locked cases samples of each product offered for sale and subject to the requirements of 935 CMR 500-110. These display cases may be transparent. A lot of consumers request to smell the product. I'm wondering if there's a way to include that in the discussion of samples so it doesn't sound like they can't leave the case.
Let's see.
Do you have proposed language?
Yes.
I was gonna say that would be great.
I'm sorry, that was a dumb question.
May display in secure locked cases samples of each product offered for sale. Could we add which may be trying to say handled by the consumer under the supervision of the agent? Not sure if handled is the right word.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking.
Provided for inspection, so what at the next, so at the end of the sentence, a new sentence that says, an authorized marijuana establishment agent may provide a sample to the consumer for inspection.
Yes.
Yeah.
For
To be
inspection.
returned. Yes.
On the
Okay,
request, yeah.
so if you could just, once you've got it written down, Commissioner Brown, if you could just read that back.
An authorized marijuana establishment agent may remove a sample from the case and provide it to the consumer for inspection.
Can I add a proviso? Provided that the consumer cannot consume or otherwise use the sample on site unless otherwise authorized herein,
I think that's good.
Good.
just to be clear.
We'll get, Commissioner Brown will read it back to you.
authorized marijuana establishment agent may remove a sample from the case and provide it to the consumer for inspection, provided that the consumer shall not consume or otherwise use the sample on site unless otherwise authorized herein.
Anybody have a problem with that? We're all okay with that?
Mhm.
Great, thank you. Did you get that, Sean? Well, we have multiple, I think we have multiple records, so I think we're good. Any other holes in section 105.105, general operational requirements for marijuana establishments? Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Title. Page, please.
Page 45. I think this must have just been a copy and paste error because in our discussion, we had some,
You're talking about R, section R?
in section 2, prohibited practices.
Right.
We had permitted all of the advertising requirements from the statute and then an additional, I think, 3 bullet points, but there's a bunch of extra in here. And I can figure out what they are in a moment.
I know R needs to come out.
Well, R needs to be changed, right, isn't it? Or isn't that about promoting responsible consumption rather than excessive consumption, or does it have to come out or get changed? I thought we agreed it.
It's up above, we put that up above in the statement, please consume responsibly.
So just take it out as your recommendation, Commissioner, correct?
Yes.
Take out number R, or letter R. What else, Commissioner Title? Things need to come out.
I didn't get a chance to do this earlier, so I just have to do it now.
Okay.
I'm looking at what's in the law compared to what's in the.
As we discussed last week.
You guys,
Remember that
can
one
you
at all?
project a little bit, please?
Yep, sorry. I think as we discussed last week, because I remember having anxiety about language that, of course, Commissioner McBride has fixed. So it's good.
Okay, up until O are all in the statute. That's good. And then I'm gonna look at the rest to see which ones we passed last week.
With the exception of Q is being taken out, or R is being taken out, so it's Q, S, T, U, and B.
Okay, so we passed 3. No advertising of an improper or objectionable nature, so that's P. P's good. No signs or other printed matter.
That's U. Sorry.
Wait, no, that's not you. Okay, so there is some wordsmithing that happened. So my suggestion is that we cut P through V now and replace it. If you go to our day 3 press release, there are 3 bullet points that we adopted, and those should be.
Sharon, are you able to bring that up?
So, we're looking at P in particular now, you struck other offensive matter on P versus.
Here it is. So I found the slide. I don't know if that's helpful.
Well, no, but
No, I
Sean's
have it
got,
right
here. Oh, okay.
Sean's got the record, though. So please continue, Sean.
Sure, so, or other offensive matter was struck
From section P.
from P, correct, and then we caught that advertising promotes excessive consumption.
Wait, that's coming out. R is going to come out.
So that's out as well, and then the last one that was taken out was advertising that was targeted toward minors.
Yep.
I'm not seeing it here, no.
Pardon? I didn't hear that.
Advertising that was targeted toward minors was struck as well.
Yeah, and that's not.
That's not in it, right.
Okay, so P we took out or offensive matter, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Q. I don't see Q in what we passed.
I don't recall discussing Q, so
Yeah, okay.
should we strike, is there an agreement to strike Q?
Was that in the version that Jerry did?
Is there
That
a?
was in the version that the contract attorney did.
Okay, but that's before
Yeah.
we need to vote. So is there any taking out other offensive matter or other offensive matter in section P? We've agreed on that. Striking section Q, is there any disagreement with that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a problem with striking Q. I think that we're
We-
talking about targeting to minors, and we're talking about diversion and, you know, these advertising and branding types of things get into the hands of
But
kids.
I think the issue is what did we vote on and approve last week as opposed to what our policy should be? I mean,
I don't know why this wasn't in it. That was in the version that the contract attorney and I worked on. And it may just not have been caught for somehow moved over.
let's.
Fine with discussing and how people.
Well, I said I was hoping that we could avoid having policy conversations. Maybe we all have to, but let's just focus on.
Or I'm willing to wait till the public hearing comments.
Let's come back to Q in a second. We've agreed that we're going to strike R. S, advertising, marketing, or branding in, on or in public or private vehicles at bus stops. I thought that we did discuss, right?
Yeah, that one's fine.
So S stays in. T is utilization of graphics related to marijuana or paraphernalia on the exterior of a marijuana establishment or the building in which the marijuana establishment is located. That was discussed and approved last week, is that correct?
Yes.
So any
Signs or other printed matter.
Yeah.
Advertising any brand or kind of marijuana product that are displayed in the exterior or interior of any licensed premises wherein marijuana products are not regularly used.
Okay, so that stays in then, T stays in. U is advertising or marketing of the price of marijuana or marijuana products, except that it shall provide a catalog or a printed list of the prices and strains of marijuana available at the marijuana establishment to consumers and may post the same catalog or printed list on its website.
Do you not like that one?
I don't think like is very
Yeah, it's not a question of what I
Well,
like,
I'm
it's
not-
just that we
I mean,
didn't
we
vote on
heard
it.
that people wanted to have prices.
I'm fine with that one, it's just not, in what we vote on, so I'm just
Well,
trying to.
yeah, we didn't vote on everything that's in the regulations last week, so we can debate it if there's objections to it, but just because we didn't vote on it doesn't mean that we can't include it in the regulations if everybody's comfortable with it.
Right, okay,
So,
so T, going back to T, it's different wording, what is here and what, we passed. So we passed no signs or other printed matter advertising any brand or any kind of marijuana product that are displayed on the exterior or interior of any licensed premises wherein marijuana products are not regularly and usually kept for sale, and I think that's broader than T. So I'd be fine with replacing that.
Propose replacing what's here in T with the language you just articulated. Okay, I'm going to go get us through all these, then we're going to come back and summarize what we need to do. So that's T. U, if it was not discussed last week, which seems like the case, doesn't mean that, as I said, we can't include it in the language if we're all comfortable. So is anybody uncomfortable with the language in U?
No.
And then V, which says display of marijuana or marijuana products so as to be clearly visible to a person from the exterior of a marijuana establishment. I also don't recall that we discussed that specifically last week, but unless there are any objections to that language, we can include that. It's statutory. That's probably why we didn't discuss it then. Okay, so let me go back to I think where we are. So there are no issues through O, correct? So P, we are taking out the last phrase, which is or other offensive matter. Okay, we're agreed on that. Q, I think I'm going to skip for a second because that's the one that I think we still have to talk about. R, we are eliminating. S, we are keeping. T, we are replacing the language that's in this draft with the language that was approved by us last week. U and V stay as is. So the only, I think, open issue on this list is Q. And again, I believe that even if we didn't discuss it last week, if we're comfortable with it, we can incorporate it into our draft regulations. So is there any discomfort with the language or the intent of Q? Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Taylor.
I think it's too broad. I'm fine with those last ones, but I think preventing any sort of promotional items is It's very broad. What if a company wanted to have promotional items, at an event, or people over 21?
So what are you suggesting in terms of the language change?
I suggest we strike it.
My question is that all we're saying is the branding of marijuana or products. We're not saying you can't brand the company.
Clothing, cups, drink holders.
But
No, that's-
marijuana or marijuana products.
That's the medium. The message is advertised, is branding marijuana or marijuana products.
We can take out a marijuana establishment and they can brand their company name.
Okay, I'd be fine with that.
But I think
Okay.
the concern was that what was going to be on it.
Okay, so in Q then, what is being proposed is that we take the language as is and just change advertising, marketing, or branding of marijuana products, or a marijuana establishment on blah, 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 clothing, cups, etc. We change to advertising, marketing, or branding of marijuana or marijuana products on clothing, etc. Is there people okay with that? Any objections to that?
Yes.
Okay, so then I think we have covered this section and agreed, so, okay. Any other, let's see where we are. We're still on general operating rules, dot 105, general operating requirements for marijuana establishments. Are there any other holds in this section?
Yes.
Yes, what's up? Please page reference, please.
47.
Yep.
H and I, the serving size of the product in milligrams if the package is a multiple serving package, the number of serving sizes within the marijuana product based on the limits provided. Just in terms of clarity, to make sure people understand what needs to go on the label, the serving size of the marijuana product, right? Not the food, I think is what we're getting at.
Right.
Okay, so I would just suggest changing that to the marijuana product.
The serving size of the marijuana product in milligrams. And the number of serving sizes of what about, you said H and I. What change would you suggest to I? It does say the serving size is within the marijuana product.
Yeah, that one's fine. Oh, okay, sorry. So my other question with H is, wouldn't it just be 5 milligrams? Oh, it could be less than 5. Okay, all right.
So the proposal is to take H and say the serving size of the marijuana product in milligrams if the package is in multiple serving package. Any objections to that? Okay. Continuing in section dot 105, general operational requirements for marijuana establishments. Any other holds? Go ahead, Commissioner Peddle.
Page 51, F2, limits on packaging design. B,
F2B, imitating or having a semblance to any existing branded consumer products, including foods and beverages that do not contain marijuana.
yes. So I think that should be resemblance. Resemblance?
Having a resemblance to. Are you suggesting that Britta's or Kay's grammar stuff? That's actually, that's okay.
word.
Oh, okay.
That does,
word.
but it does not, that's not a misspelling, so that's appropriate for this conversation.
Yeah, I don't think it's
No.
a clear typo. It's a question.
Yeah. I think it's resemble.
I think I've seen that, the semblance language.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that word, so, but I think resemble.
It means like a tiny amount, like a semblance of.
Oh, okay.
Like a
So,
modicum.
so we're saying we're going to agree, or we're going to talk about whether we agree to imitating or having a resemblance to any branded consumer products. Is anybody uncomfortable with that? Or how's your?
So I'll give you the actual definition, if that helps.
Of course it would.
Okay. The outward appearance or apparent form of something, especially when the reality is different.
That's semblance.
That's
That's
semblance.
semblance.
That sounds like what we're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so then my question is, if you look at B and D, B is imitating or having a semblance to any existing branded consumer products that do not contain marijuana. So that's a very large group of things, right?
Mhm.
If you look at D, featuring a design, brand, or name that resembles a non-cannabis consumer product of the type that is typically marketed to minors, that's a much smaller thing that I think we need to more strongly regulate. But if semblance is a broader term than resembles, then I think it's backwards. I think B should be resemblance and D should be.
Should we just make them both semblance?
It's statutory language.
Both of these
Semblance
are,
is in the statute.
Semblance
semblance
and
and statute.
resembles are statutory.
okay?
Okay, I'll
Not
withdraw
to
it then.
suggest the statute. Perfect.
No, but I think that we need to adhere to the statutory requirements, so I think that's, let's move on.
Yep.
Okay, we're still in section dot 105, general operational requirements for marijuana establishments. Are there any other holds?
Page 62.
Page, I'm sorry, 62? Go ahead.
Okay, so under consumer verification, I wanted to have a discussion because it was brought up in our stakeholder meeting with Yes on 4 that the statute says that regulations may not require a customer to provide a marijuana retailer with identifying information other than identification to determine the customer's age, and shall not require the marijuana retailer to acquire or record personal information about customers other than information typically required in a retail transaction. And the concern was that requiring name, address, date of birth, date of delivery, and a signature would violate that.
So the address, they need to get to the house, so I don't think we can avoid that one.
Yes.
And
date of birth for the ID, that would be disclosed anyway.
Yeah, I mean, is the issue as simple as the requirement of a signature?
Yes.
So let's talk about that. And I think I was the one, I think actually Commissioner Flanagan was the one that
I am.
suggested that. I supported that suggestion. If it's in violation of the statute, it's in violation of the statute, but I believe it's an important security requirement, so I'm wondering if we can get a discussion or an opinion about whether it is in violation of the statute, because all we're requiring, in addition to what is required in a brick and mortar retail establishment, is the signature.
And again, when alcohol is being delivered by mail, someone over 21 has to sign for it.
You know, I think the merit, the debate is not on merits, the debate is whether the statute prohibits us from requiring the signature. I agree with you on the merits, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it was a unanimous vote, so the merit's not a question.
So does anybody have a informed opinion based upon the reading of the statute?
Can you tell me where the statute is?
Commissioner Papa?
Can I tell you the search term? That'd be easiest. Oh, you're on the hard copy. Okay.
She's doing low tech.
Sorry, mine is all marked up. Okay, then. It's in the regulations made pursuant to this section shall not from chapter 55, I think.
What would you just read that out again, please, Commissioner
Yeah,
Papa?
sure. Regulations made pursuant to this section shall not, this is number 2, require a customer to provide a marijuana retailer with identifying information other than identification to determine the customer's age, and shall not require the marijuana retailer to acquire or record personal information about customers other than information typically required in a retail transaction.
So I think information typically required in a retail transaction when we're talking about the delivery of a substance that is prohibited to people under the age of 21 would be a signature. I think that is the basis. Like, that would be typical in a retail transaction where there is a delivery, right? You're going to, like alcohol, wine, you do need to have that signed for by someone who's 21 or they won't deliver it. And that's typical.
Doesn't seem to violate, as a non-attorney, that does not seem to violate the letter of that statute, so. Are we okay?
Yeah, I'll let it go.
Okay, thanks. We're still in dot 105, general operation requirements for marijuana establishments. Any other holds?
Nope.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Moving on, dot 110, security requirements for marijuana establishments. Any holds on this section? Moving on, thank you. Dot 120, additional operating requirements for marijuana cultivation. Any holds in this section? Can I just get the,
No.
yeah, some kind of, just want to make sure I'm just not assuming that there are no holds. Thank you. Moving on, dot 130, additional operating requirements for marijuana product manufacturers. Any holds in this section?
No.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, dot 140, additional operating requirements for retail sales. Any holds in this section?
No.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, dot 145, additional operating requirements for social consumption.
Hold.
Gee, I'm not surprised that this one was going to take some time, so go ahead. Was that Commissioner Title or Commissioner Doyle?
Yeah, I think it's
Commissioner Doyle.
both
It's the
of
same
us.
one.
Yeah. It's the
Okay,
same.
well, either, then you guys can fight over who gets to talk.
You have it written out there.
Okay. It
All right,
was,
can you give us a page reference, please?
sure. This is page 82 at the top, subsection capital
Wait a minute,
C.
82 at subsection what?
Capital C.
Yes?
This is the same issue that I referred to earlier when we were talking about
me.
the definitions. This was just a drafting omission on my part, forgetting the issue that the single servings, I'll read how it reads now because I think that'll make it clear to the audience. All marijuana products must remain in its original packaging and may not be further processed. All preparation of edibles must comply with the requirements under 935 CMR 500.105, 935 CMR 130, and 935 CMR 500.150. Commissioner Title correctly points out that if it remained in its original packaging and could not be further processed, it could not be cooked into food as contemplated in the marijuana cafe restaurant type
Sure.
thing
Makes sense.
that we had discussed last week. So I would propose language to the effect that after the word processed, comma, except social consumption operations that are licensed as a restaurant pursuant to, and we'll insert the statutory site, I believe it's a common victular license for restaurants.
Can I ask a tag, does that create a problem which is resolvable but has to be addressed, which is mass meals tax?
Yeah. I think we'll have to wait for final regulations
Okay.
to resolve that.
No, I didn't want to resolve it today. I'm flagging it. That I think
Yes,
we'll
I'm
have to
sure
have that conversation
you and
with
Commissioner
DOR.
Harding can
Yes,
have a
with
look
DOR
at
at some
that.
point after January 1st.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, after the statutory
Sorry.
site, comma, subject to any guidance developed by the commission. And so what I was referring to with that is just, we may want to look at whether or not there are any guidance around the country and other places that do this sort of thing to preserve the this is the word I was telling you I didn't know how to pronounce, homogeneity or homogeneousness?
Homogeneity.
Homogeneity,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Mr. Chairman. Homogeneity of dosing in the product. I think we should probably look to make sure we either have a way to train people on that as part of the responsible vendor training program, or otherwise provide guidance as to what would be expected to the extent we can find it, but hopefully we will.
And we may just want to specify certain infused products that this applies to, like butter, where it would be evenly distributed.
Right, so I think that's maybe a level of detail I think that might be appropriate for sub-regulatory
Right.
guidance.
So can we get? Can you go back to open language again, Commissioner Doyle? That you're proposing?
I can
Yep.
read it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Okay, so C will read, all marijuana products must remain in its original the original packaging and may not be further processed except social consumption operations that are licensed as a restaurant pursuant to site, subject to any guidance developed by the commission.
Any objections to that? Okay. Any other holds in section .145 on social consumption? Additional operating requirements for social consumption, excuse me. No? Okay, thank you. Moving on, section .150, edibles. Any holds in that section? Can I get affirmative?
No.
That's- Thank you. Moving on, .160, testing. Any holds in this section? No. Okay, thank you. Moving on, .170, municipal requirements. Any holds in this section? Okay, thank you. Moving on. .200, regulations for Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. Any holds in this section? Okay, thank you. .300, inspections and compliance. Any holds in this section? Great, thank you. .301, unannounced purchase for purpose of testing, secret shopper program. I don't know if that was a technical regulatory term. It is now.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
We're breaking all kinds of new ground here, aren't we?
I actually did go back and forth as to whether to leave the parenthesis in, but I think, to the extent that you want regulations to be understandable to people who aren't attorneys.
Is that an objective? I didn't realize that.
It is, and I know it's often very dense legal language, so I thought, why not leave that term in? Because I think that makes it very understandable as to what this is.
Thank you, Commissioner Doyle. I agree with that. It's a noble endeavor. .301, unannounced purchase for purposes of testing, open paren, secret shopper program, close paren. Any holes in that section? Okay, thank you. .302, complaints process. Any holes in this section? Great, thank you very much. .310, deficiency statements. Any holes in this section? Great, thank you. .320, plans of correction. Any holes in this section? Thank you. .330, marijuana establishments, limitation of sales. Any holes in that section?
I don't have that section.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'd say it's on the title page, so maybe.
I'm sorry, it may be me somehow not cutting it and pasting it into
Oh, was that the supplemental thing?
over. No, that's always been in here. It's taken directly from the medical use of marijuana program, limitation of sales. I could literally read it out loud. I apologize. I just think I didn't. Somehow last night I managed not to put it into the document, but for reference, essentially what it is if the commission determines that a marijuana establishment does not substantially comply with applicable provisions of the regulations or the act, the commission may order the marijuana establishment shall not sell marijuana after a date specified to consumers. Then there's another subsection. The commission shall not make such a determination until a marijuana establishment has been notified that the marijuana establishment does not substantially comply with applicable provisions of the regulations or the act, that an order to limit sales is contemplated, and that the marijuana establishment has a reasonable opportunity to correct the deficiencies. And there's a third subsection. An order that a marijuana establishment shall not sell marijuana pursuant to the first subsection of this regulation may be rescinded when the commission finds that the marijuana establishment is in substantial compliance with the applicable provisions of the regulations. So I apologize, cut and
No.
paste there on my
Look,
part.
if that's the biggest omission, any problems with the language? And so I'm sorry, you're proposing adopting language from the DPH, medical marijuana regulations?
Right, we had talked about that last week. It's part of the sort of progressive discipline and enforcement.
Any problems with that proposed language? Okay, thank you.
I put it in.
You got it in there. Thank you very much, Sean. .340, summary cease and desist order and quarantine order.
Sorry.
Is that the same thing?
Yep.
Again, again, DPH regulatory language.
Yes.
Can you read it, please?
Sure.
Thanks.
Is this summary cease and desist order?
Yeah, summary, it's .340, summary cease and desist order and quarantine order.
Yep. A summary cease and desist order or quarantine order may be imposed by the Commission prior to hearing and order immediately to stop or restrict operations by a marijuana establishment to protect the public health, safety, or welfare. The Commission may rescind or amend a summary cease and desist order or quarantine order. New subsection. If, based upon inspection affidavits or other evidence, the Commission determines that a marijuana establishment or the products prepared by a marijuana establishment pose an immediate or serious threat to the public health, safety, or welfare, the Commission may, 1, issue a cease and desist and or quarantine order requiring cessation or restriction of any or all marijuana establishment operations and prohibiting the use of marijuana produced by that marijuana establishment, or 2, issue a cease and desist order placing restrictions on a marijuana establishment to the extent necessary to avert a continued threat, pending investigation results. And then the last subsection, the requirements of the cease and desist order or the quarantine order shall remain in effect until the Commission rescinds or amends such requirements or until such time as the Commission takes final action on any related pending complaint and issues a final decision.
Any objections to that language?
No.
Thank you. I suspect that we're going to just go through the same thing because the next is .350 summary suspension order.
Okay.
Is that the same thing? Is it not in the...
It's very short, thank goodness. Summary suspension order. The Commission may summarily suspend, any registration card or license issued pursuant to the regulations pending further proceedings for denial of renewal or revocation of a license whenever the Commission finds that the continued licensure poses an immediate danger to the public health, safety, or welfare.
Any objections to that language? Okay, thank you. Moving on, .400, marijuana establishments, grounds for denial of renewal applications and revocation. Is that in?
That's actually there.
Any holds on that language?
I don't have a hold. I have a question.
Sure.
I wonder, we had fines up there next to fees, but I wonder if it would make sense to move fines here, because it seems like it would make sense among the list of progressive disciplinary measures.
I don't have a problem with that, but I will leave it to.
Commissioner McBride, do you have an opinion on that?
I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I'd like to be able to kind of look and see, for purely regulatory consistency, like with other regulations, like to be able to look and see if unless it's, otherwise prohibited.
Okay, thank you. .415, void marijuana establishment licenses. Any holds on section .415? Is that another one?
Yeah, sorry. All right.
That's
here
okay.
we go.
This is still Herculean work. So. .415, void marijuana establishment license. That's also from DPH regulations, Commissioner Doyle.
Yes. Can I see the table of contents for a second?
This is what you gave me.
Yeah. No, I just want to make sure I'm reading out loud the right thing.
I cannot be accused of tampering.
No. I just wanted to double check that I was about to read the right thing out loud. A marijuana establishment registration is void if the marijuana establishment transfers its location without Commission approval or ceases to operate.
Any problem? Any objections to that language? No. Thank you. Do you want this back? Because next is .450, effective denial of renewal or revocation of marijuana establishment license, revocation of marijuana establishment agent registration, and surrender of a registration. Is that included? Mm-hmm. So any objections or any holds on the language? Thank you. .500, administrative appeals. Any holes on the language in this section? Okay, thank you. Dot 650, non-conflict with other law. Any holes in that section? Okay, thank you. Dot 700, waivers. Any holes in the language in that section?
Just a question about
Sure.
that. Is the form like a statewide standard, or would the form need to be made by the commission?
We need to make a form. I don't think DPH, at least when I left DPH, I don't think they had a form for this yet, but it is a good idea. I think it's helpful to the requesters
Yeah.
to put it in a form. That way it teases up each thing they need to fill out.
Okay. Could we add something like in a form determined by the commission?
Commission may waive upon submission of a form.
Yeah.
Upon any form and manner as required by.
And would you just do that one more time, please, Commissioner McBride, once you've typed it in? Please.
Hold on.
Yeah, sure.
So I would insert it in D. The requester provides to the commission written documentation in a form and manner as determined by the commission supporting its request for a waiver.
Any objections to that language? Thank you. Dot 750, notice. Any holes in that section? Okay, thank you. Dot 800, severability. Any holes in this section?
Would it never come in?
Pardon? It's
Hopefully
good
it never
point.
comes in.
Good point. But no holes in the section, notwithstanding that I share Commissioner McBride's hope. No holes? Okay, section dot 900, background check suitability standard for licensure and registration. Any holes in this section?
It's just incomplete. Oh.
Oh, no. The numbering is kind of, it goes like it's.
This is part of this.
Yeah.
No. Any holes in section dot 900? No. Well, amazingly enough.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Oh,
I-
wait, come on, there's nothing here.
I know, but I saw something.
Oh, God, talk
in
about
another discussion.
premature celebration.
I know, I'm so sorry. I knew that was going to happen.
Well, then why don't you stop it?
Well, I just did.
Before I embarrassed myself.
Well, I'm just not fast enough, I'm afraid. I just noticed something in the definitions section.
Yes.
And again, I think it's we put two definitions in there and I meant to scratch one. And the second definition of marijuana product
Yes.
is, should be deleted. The first one is the one that's compliant with the statute.
So I'm sorry, I'm looking at page 3.
You're looking at page 6.
6.
If it's the same pagination that I have.
Well, it's the pagination you gave me.
Right, but.
Page 6, marijuana products means products that have been manufactured in that section.
Yes.
And what are you proposing specifically?
There's, if you notice, there's two definitions, and the second one is an old one from DPH. I propose we delete that one and stick with the one that is consistent.
So the one that
with
says
statute.
marijuana products plural, you're proposing we retain, and the one that says marijuana products singular, we
Yep.
delete?
Yep.
Any objections to that?
No.
Anything else that I'm going to embarrass myself with?
I need to go back to something.
Yeah, sure. Which one?
I need to
Give
go
us
back
the page.
Page 18.
Yeah.
So this is where I brought up the whole controlling person thing. So I just want to make sure, I was looking for clarity. I want to make sure we're not making a huge substantive policy decision here, because the definition of controlling person means an officer, board member, or other individual who has a financial or voting interest of 10% or greater. And I just am not clear on whether that's the intended entity here.
Yeah, so I think this language was intended to be similar to what is in place for the medical ones, where you have, it's different language. It's something like no executive or member, I think, and that's can be sometimes difficult to interpret when member is helpful when you're talking about a nonprofit corporation.
Right. I
But
don't know
there's
if it's
so
applicable.
many, there's so many different other corporate models that could be available here. So I was trying to provide some flexible language by saying individual or entity, but get to the same place, that same idea that it not be controlling, whatever I had said before, over more than 3 licenses in a particular class of license. Similar to no licensee shall be granted more than 3 licenses in a particular class. I believe the purpose underlying that was to encourage a more small business environment in Massachusetts rather than the development of sort of an enormous box store of marijuana.
I'm familiar, yeah.
Yeah,
I just
I
want to make
figured you
sure
were.
that everyone understood the meaning of controlling person. Everyone was okay with
Yeah,
that.
and it may be, I know we may get feedback in the written and oral comments during the public hearing process that may have unintended consequences, but it's a good.
Any other
Alright,
questions or issues?
Overall,
Yeah.
I had 2 items that came up during the stakeholder meeting. I was wondering if I could bring up, out of the
you-
hundreds, it's just 2.
Yeah, I think we need to bring them up for sure, and then I think we'll discuss how to address them. Go
Okay,
ahead.
all right. So these were the only 2 that came up that did not relate to changing something. They were completely new, so that's why I wanted to bring them up. So one came from the ABCC and one came from Smith, Costello, and Crawford, the lobbying firm, just in the interest of transparency. Those were the 2 stakeholder meetings. And the first one was the idea that as we are putting in so many provisions in place to try to encourage small businesses, that we make sure there's no undue influence between a wholesaler and a retailer. This was brought up in
There are no wholesalers.
sorry, the
Manufacturer?
manufacturer, yes.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the alcohol language.
Yeah, no, but that's
So-
one very big distinction between the
Yes.
alcohol distribution and ours.
Yes,
Go
so
ahead.
let's see if I
Sorry,
can
sorry.
explain this as a non-expert. So the idea is that we want it to be fair when a manufacturer or cultivator is when a retailer is deciding what to put on their shelves.
Mhm.
And so we want to make sure that there's no undue influence, which is something that has come up in alcohol regulation.
Right.
And so the suggestion that came from a stakeholder meeting with ABCC was similar to what's in Washington under alcohol. And it says any retailer and this is a complaint process that's being described here. Any industry member or retailer or any other person seeking a determination by the commission as to whether a proposed or existing financial interest has resulted in or is more likely than not to result in undue influence or has resulted or is more likely than not to result in an adverse impact on public health and safety may file a complaint or request for determination with the commission. Upon receipt of a request or complaint, the Commission may conduct such an investigation as it deems appropriate in the circumstances. If the investigation reveals the financial interest has resulted or is more likely than not to result in undue influence, or has resulted or is more likely than not to result in an adverse impact on public health and safety, the Commission may, and we may need to change this, issue an administrative violation notice or notice of intent to deny the license or both.
Can I ask a question for clarification? Is undue influence a legally defined term? I just wonder if we're going to be put in a situation where we're going to have to make judgments that are qualitative rather than defined.
Right, so let me try and answer, and then I want to maybe ask Sean if you wouldn't mind weighing in. The point of that being a broad term that's not defined in the statute or regulation would be to give the commission the discretion to investigate the situation.
So this is a practice in alcohol, and it's something I think that the ABCC has been monitoring and trying to. I don't want to say it's an accepted practice or a usual practice, but I think in alcohol what has been difficult is essentially assigning a value to what influence is.
Mhm.
So for instance, a wholesaler providing a new restaurant coasters to use on their bar is them giving something of value that may induce behavior. that compared to providing an entire tap system in a restaurant, I think you can draw a line between the two, but where do you draw the line?
Where do you draw the line?
And that's what's been difficult, and it's actually the subject of litigation.
I can't imagine it wouldn't be the subject of litigation. If it's not defined, then it's, challenging the judgment of the commission. They just, anyway, I'm just not sure, I guess, from a process standpoint, and I'm not trying to make a determination as much as get input on what should be the process. This is something we did not discuss. I believe it's an important issue. So I think the only question I have is when we should discuss it, whether we should discuss it now before we finalize draft regulations, or whether there is a process post the draft regulations being posted, but before final regulations are made, where we should discuss it. And I just would like some input on what's the best process for, because I'm sure there are other issues that we also will confront that we haven't confronted yet.
There's certain.
So I'd appreciate some just suggestions on process, if I could, not to, again, stop the conversation, nor to say that I don't believe it's an important issue, because I believe it is.
I guess just my concern, and then I'll let the regulatory experts weigh in, was that the reason I did bring it up now was because distinct from a lot of the other feedback that I got, it wasn't related to anything that was already in it. So I didn't know if something like that comes up during the hearings, if you can add something new or not.
So I appreciate that distinction.
Sorry, I'm actually just trying to see if there's a way, without adding anything new, where we could affect somewhat similar to the same thing. And I was just going to ask you if you could slide your laptop over so I could read the language.
Can I just, as I'm asking for a process suggestion, I want to explain why I'm asking for a process suggestion, which is I am not comfortable with this. So if we are going to put it into regulations, we need to have I think, a pretty full conversation.
Sure.
So the question is, when should we have the full conversation, now or at some subsequent time in the process? But I do believe, well, I agree this is a very important issue. I believe it requires a substantial amount of discussion.
Sure. So the commission, so what this essentially calls for is for a complaints process and to authorize the commission to conduct an investigation. We do already have a complaints process identified in our regulations, and we do already have an investigation authority both in the statute and in the regulations. So that's why I was trying to think whether or not there did need to be anything new added. Let me just look to see if there is any.
Can I bring something up in the meantime?
Um,
Along those lines, addressing
Sure.
your concern. So your concern was that undue influence was perhaps too broad.
No,
I
said broad. No, I think it's a much broader issue. Go
Just
ahead.
to finish my point.
Apologize.
The examples that the ABCC did send me actually did go into a lot of detail about what Sean was saying, what is the promotional material, what the limits are. I suggested this one because I thought broad was better, but that's a conversation we can
But that's a conversation we need to have. But just to clarify, that is not my only concern on this topic.
All right.
Okay. So broadly, there's a complaints process already in the regulations. The commission does have the power to investigate. The only issue would be that this issue of undue influence is not specifically identified as a particular investigation.
Nor is it excluded, though.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not excluded. It seems like it's a very meaty thing to try and handle at this point. in the
So my
process.
question explicitly is there an acceptable way subsequent to today to handle this issue, and what would that be? And when would that be in kind of our timeline?
So, we can look and see whether or not putting it in the final regulations would be within the scope of what was posted in the draft. Or we do know, pursuant to the statute, that at some point in the future, we are going to be taking the medical use of marijuana program under our auspices. We are going to have to amend our regulations as well as adopt new medical use of marijuana regulations at that time, and we do know that has to happen before December 31st, 2018.
Correct.
So we know we're already gonna have to reopen regulations at least
some point.
once in 2018, so we wanted to further investigate and develop that program. There is going to be another opportunity to do so.
Commissioner McBride, what are your thoughts?
So, I mean, I think it's, I'm looking right now at the regulation, requirements, and I think that, I think it's possible for us to incorporate this at some point between now and the final. I think that if we want to do that, I would recommend that, I think we would have to have a fuller conversation.
That's
about
what I'm
it,
asking
right?
for, yeah.
So there's always the chance that after we submit the draft, that if you make extensive changes that are not kind of based on what comes back during the public hearings, there's always the chance that you have to resubmit, that the Secretary of State's office will tell you need to resubmit, and then that delays the publication process. That is something that I think that we don't know if that's going to be, this would be considered to be an extensive change. I think if we can take a risk and kind of have a hearing on this particular issue in between now and then, and sort of take a shot at, or we could try to kind of set this aside per Commissioner Doyle's suggestion
Until we take over or have the conversation about the medical marijuana transition.
Or many, as we've talked about, or if there's something before medical that we take.
See, my concern is that there's going to be other things, I believe, that will come up during our public comment and public hearing session that we just didn't consider. I mean, that's to me one of the main benefits of having these public hearings is that we'll get some help and some input. So I really want to make sure that we have a process that can handle future discussions and decisions that we'll inevitably need to make between now and the promulgation of final regulations in March. So this while it was raised earlier before the formal public hearings, I think this is analogous to other issues that are going to get raised that we're going to want to consider.
I think that's probably right. I mean, I guess I would, because we do have a complaint process in place and an investigation process, I think, on this issue, I mean, I think that it dovetails enough that I'd be willing to take a shot at it, but there's.
And then, if I'm hearing, so because we have a complaint process, if we were to have a subsequent public discussion and debate and vote on the specific issue about preventing undue influence, that would not be a quote extensive change in your.
I don't think so, but why don't we do this? I mean, because I don't know that we are in a position, because we don't have something to respond to right now, right, in terms of draft language.
Right.
Could I suggest that we confer with the Secretary of State's office and maybe get an opinion on whether this would be considered to be an extensive change, and then we can take it from there, because we're not today, right? I mean, like right now, we're not prepared to sort of look at language and say, this is what we're going to do. So if it ends up being that the Secretary of State's office says it's not, we wouldn't consider that to be extensive, then we draft something,
and otherwise we have to go with
forward.
And then we otherwise have to go with Commissioner Doyle's suggestion, I suspect. I'm
Commissioner Doyle, does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
So we'll not amend the draft regulations, but we'll follow the process as outlined by Commissioner McBride?
Yes, and I appreciate that explanation. Just want to make sure I'm hearing right. So aside from this issue, if there is something that comes up during the hearings that would be an extensive change to the draft regulations, we could not include it at that point.
Generally, the idea is, and I believe it's a scope issue. You want to make sure that people have notice of a particular thing. So if it's so extensively changed that people wouldn't have had the sufficient notice, Commissioner McBride, feel free to jump in here if I'm not getting this right. They may want you to go out again to public hearing. And so we want to obviously try to avoid that since we have that statutory deadline. But you can to address any issues that you realize have, you know, we've learned something valuable, as I'm sure we will, during public hearings that we think could cause such a thing. Again, we can reopen the regulations and go through the process again after having filed something that was within the scope. There are ways to get, you know, to these sort of issues.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Okay. And then the second issue, Commissioner Title?
I've decided to withdraw it.
You have it. Thank you. Are there any, so there are no additional changes to what has been discussed at this point then? Are there any additional conversations or discussions before I put a motion or ask for a motion to approve? Okay, thank you. So I would like a motion to approve draft regulations entitled 935 CMR 500 as discussed and revised by the Commission today, December 21st, 2017, subject to correcting clerical errors, formatting, and other ministerial corrections. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Can I have a second? Let the record show that Commissioner Flanagan made a motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Doyle. All in favor?
Aye.
Let the record show that the Commission voted to approve these draft regulations 935 CMR 500 unanimously. There being no further business before the Commission, I will move to adjourn with one statement, which is that our next Commission meeting is January 9th of 2018. I want to thank the Commission. I want to thank everybody that's been in the process, both at these meetings as well as input that we received from you and a very large group of interested parties. I think this has been a great process, and I'm very proud of what we've accomplished together. So thank you all. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and we will see you in 2018. We're adjourned.
Oh, I'm so sorry about all the sessions.